بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وإمام المرسلين سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to this read-through of Contemplating the Quran. We have, alhamdulillah, reached the 19th juz of the Quran today, covering Surah al-Furqan, Shu'ara and An-Naml. And the theme of this juz is dialogue is the best way to bring people together. In essence, dialogue is responding to opinions and moving them back and forth between more than one party, whether in agreement or disagreement. Etymologically, it comes from the verb to return and has its own etiquettes, forms and appropriate circumstances. But relating dialogues is one of the most effective methods of teaching. This is because every participant's premises and proofs are laid out before one and expanded upon, such that it is possible to draw out the exact point they are making with clarity. Similarly, the ability to faithfully and accurately relate the positions of one's opponents reveals one's own firm-footedness, depth, and strength of argument. This part thus commences by relaying the statements of the disbelievers who deny resurrection and then responding to them. The first of these is their demand that the angels descend to them, or that God reveal himself, thus exposing the extent of their materialistic outlook. It's verse 21 of Surah Furqan. Other statements are related to the demand that the entire Quran be revealed at one go, and the rejection of its revelation in sections, in verse 32. Their deriding of the final Prophet ﷺ, and their claiming that he was striving to mislead them from their own gods, in verse 42, and disbelievingly asking, "Who is this Ar-Rahman?" in verse 60. Truth itself, God, clearly rebuts each of these statements in their respective places before concluding the chapter Al-Furqan with detailed descriptions of the All-Merciful and his servants. God, the All-Merciful, here is revealed, unveiled through his actions, such as the placing of stars in the heavens, the igniting of the lamp of the sun, and making the moon a resplendent light, in verse 61. His servants, who associate themselves with this attribute, are themselves humbled by his wisdom, turning to him in repentance. They are the people who steer clear of sins such as murder and giving false testimony, and those who constantly turn to him in supplication. Verse 77. So as much as the All-Merciful has placed within the heavens stars and a shining moon, he has placed on the earth his servants, who shine with wisdom, justice, repentance, purity, humility, and above all, mercy. The presentation of the statements and dialogues continues in Surah al-Shu'ara, which narrates to us the exchange between Moses and Pharaoh. It reveals the latter's lack of good manners with his disputant. Through his engagement in ad hominem arguments, he maligned the person of Moses, accusing him of insanity and threatening him with imprisonment in verses 26 to 29. The steadfastness of Moses, the clarity and strength of his proofs, are all presented in the best manner of debate and dialogue in verse 30. This is in stark contrast to the manifest weakness of Pharaoh, who did not hesitate to threaten with punishment those magicians whom he had brought along in the first place to confront Moses, who had themselves submitted and believed when they recognized the reality. Moses thus converted them from being Pharaoh's allies to his intellectual adversaries, such that the latter had no choice but to defame them throughout the lands, thus abandoning intelligent debate for ignorant threats. In verse 52, having no proof left to support himself, he was left only with his rage against them. The chapter goes on to describe occasions of dispute between Abraham and his people, when he asked them, "What is that you worship?" Heard them reply, "We worship graven images," and then apprised them of the truth in the most persuasive manner. Can they hear you? Do they benefit you? God thus demonstrated their utter lack of proof, and that their way was one of blind obedience to their forefathers. That's verses 70 to 74. We also hear of the debate of Noah, who exhorted his people to taqwa, and of their brushing it off with an illogical argument, in order that they might reject faith, this being, that he was only followed by the weak. That's verse 111. What kind of reasoning is this, that might prevent people traversing the path to salvation, only because they do not want to be in the same group with those of lower wealth or social status? Then we see Hud engaging in debate, reminding his people of the blessings God had bestowed upon them: livestock, children, gardens, and springs. While his people rejected all of this in every defiance of evidence. That's verses 133 to 138. We then witness Salih debating and sincerely counselling his people not to follow the command of those who were overweeningly rebellious. That's 151. His people's rejection of him, attack on his person, and abandonment of the basis of the premise, rejecting his words with ad hominem attacks. Verse 154. Thereafter Lut commanded and forbade, and was threatened with being driven out by his people. In verse 167, Shu'aib, or Jethro, called upon the people of Madian to be just in their financial dealings, in verse 182, but they employed precisely the same faulty logic as the people of Salih, to reject his words, that he was only followed by the weak. That's verses 185 to 186. The chapter closes by presenting several instances of genuine debate being overcome and abandoned for the stirring up of emotions and incitement of heated feelings, alluding to those poets who sought to weaponize words to revile their opponents and mislead ignoramuses. They confounded their intellects with sophistry, attempting to stimulate their base emotions, verse 224, and thereby diverted people from all beneficial discussion. All too frequently, poetry is a tool for corruption of hearts by embellishment of words, upturning realities and altering affairs, unless it is done sincerely for the sake of Allah and with utmost sincerity on the part of its composer. It's verse 227. Surah An-Naml also begins with a dialogue between Moses and his Lord, in verse 8. Following this with another of unique nature, describing for us an ant conversing with his community. Yet another follows this, between Sulaiman or Solomon and the hoopoe bird. Then a fourth, between this prophet of God and some of the more amazing members of his army, one possessed of knowledge, in verse 40, and an ifrit of the jinn, in verse 39. This all culminates with a beautiful dialogue between this noble prophet and the Queen of Sheba, the subject of the aforementioned conversations, ending with her entry into the religion of God. This debate thus being an example of a fruitful and beneficial one, in verse 44. After mention of the debate and argumentation between Salih, Lut, and their respective peoples, this part draws to a close, and with it this series of dialogues, replete with rules and etiquette, but also revelations of their pitfalls and the problems that may be occurred when embarking upon them. All that remains for us, then, is to act, strive, and maintain humility. Jazakallah khair. صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.